Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Craig Jeffery. I am joined today by Steve Traut from Superior. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Craig, for having me today.
So today's topic is best practices in client conversion. What that refers to is so many companies have services at banks, and banks make significant updates to their program or their systems, and they need to have a mass conversion of moving people along, and that's something that Superior does. Steve, I want to ask you a little bit about your background in a bit, but today's topic is really focused on some of these best practices. And we'll put some things in the show notes about Superior's 10 best practices for a client change event. But I wanted to get into some of the case studies. We talked about some of these before. I wanted to hear that story because I think we can learn really well from stories and some good examples. The first one I wanted to talk about is this idea that conversions are a way of life. There was a large regional bank with thousands of clients needing to go through a conversion to step up to a better situation. What were some of the dimensions and statistics of that situation? What was the scope?
The scope was the bank is a top 50 bank, and they had 3,000 clients, commercial clients using an RDC application that was being upgraded. And they wanted to complete this within a 3-month period. And they didn't have the internal resources to do that. And they were going from a dual site application into a single sign-on application, which caused a number of changes to the customer experience and what they had to do to get to that new version of RDC software.
So RDC stands for Remote Deposit Capture. This is where it's taking physical checks, running them through, I think they call it a toaster. Is that right? Or a device that scans it.
Yep, those check scanners.
Yeah, so these are physical devices. You've got this large number of customers in a fairly short window. So when you look at something like this, there's physical devices that have to be shipped, different setups that have to take place. Is the approach generally a big bang conversion, everything at once? Is it you start with a pilot and then you do a rollout in a number of phases? Is it just a general phase-out approach?
Yeah, great question. We were lucky. I've seen it both ways. Big bang. Typically, big bang, they're going to flip the switch over a weekend and cut over. I've seen that a lot more in an acquisition type M&A mode. Luckily, on a conversion like this, they had 2 platforms stood up, and we were able to migrate in waves, which is the best practice, the way to do that. And we were fortunate on this program to be able to do that in waves and accomplish the goal that way.
There's never a situation where you do a massive conversion where there are not some challenges or issues that come up. I was wondering if you could say what are some of the problems that were encountered, what happened, and then maybe how did either best practices or just approaches to solving those come about?
Yeah, the challenges come up is, do the end users, the ones actually using the application, have access to a single sign-on application? In this instance, the RDC end user was going to a different website with a different login, and now the bank was converting them over to the main online banking page, and that meant those users had to get soft tokens, hard tokens to even access the new platform. And so getting out those credentials, that was something that you had to be aware of, that when we're doing our piece of walking a customer through the conversion, which included a driver uninstall and reinstall on their computer, and getting them into the platform and walking them through first deposit. So they obviously needed access to the online banking site.
I'm assuming there's a new RDC scanner There's a hard or soft token. And then so you're making sure they get the first one through. So it's walking them through it. So it's not like a failure and then.
Right. Walking them through. Now, in this case, the hardware that the end user was using still was able to be used on the new platform, on the upgraded platform. So we didn't have to ship out new hardware in most instances, because it was just one version of software that got upgraded to a new version, but it was the same application. So luckily in that environment, the hardware still worked, but it required to go into, the end user's computer and get to a directory and uninstall a driver and then reinstall the driver. And that was the technical piece that you had to make sure the end user had admin rights for that matter, right? I mean, as you know, a lot of large corporates in even at Superior, our users don't have admin rights. So you have that to deal with when scheduling the one-on-one appointments or having your end users do a self-upgrade.
I have a question that just popped into my mind. I want to talk about communication, like communicating. That's one of the best practices that you have on your list. If you send something out and it's like self-service, the client's supposed to do these 10 things and you send a pretty list and a process, what percentage will actually do that versus the more detailed hand-holding? They're on the call and you step them through it. Is it 10%, 20% who might do it?
What we're finding is about 30% of the clients will opt to a self-upgrade. And now of those 30%, about 10% of those get stuck halfway through, and then they end up calling in for assistance. And what we help, and you talk about communications in most of our conversion events, the bank is pushing out communications via their online banking portal. They're sending out a notice via snail mail or email. We propose that they get their RMs involved, their sales team, to just, make sure clients know that there's going to be an outreach and they need to take action. So you talk about communications going all the way through the bank, from customer service, tech support, and the relationship managers. With that, coupled with the outbound email sequencing that we provide with call to actions to the end users, they could either, go to a web page and watch a video and, the instructions to do their upgrades, or they could book an appointment, a one-on-one, similar to like an open table reservation system where you pick your date and time that you want to, go to dinner. Same thing in our application is, the end user is able to book their one-on-one appointment, and then we complete it at that point.
Right, for a time that works for them. Now, if you had like 3,300 companies making these changes, two questions come from that. One is, you're asking for admin rights. And I think with the growth of fraud and concerns, are they more leery now than they used to be when someone says, hey, we're doing this update for the bank? How much of a concern is that now? And does communication reduce that? How has that changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we all know and we hear you can't click on links anymore, right? I mean, that's hey, if you don't know it's coming, don't click on it. We preach it, the banks preach it. So that's why communication is super important to the whole process. I mean, and that's why it's got to be from the bank, from the relationship manager. The client needs to know that there is going to be an event. There's going to be, an email coming. Go ahead, and if it's a white label, look for that from the bank. If it's a strategic partner, then let the end user know that, so they know that it's a legitimate, request, call to action. You have to do an outbound support effort. So typically we found in our model is we push out, we get the tranche of data from the bank. We push out communications. A third of those clients will just, go ahead and book their appointments for conversion. And then we got to get on the phone and do an outbound outreach. Like, hey, did you get a communication? We want to make sure you booked your appointment. So you have that typical bell curve, right? Where you get some in the front, the early adapters, and then you have the majority that need a nudge after, a while. And then you have the scragglers at the end that whatever you do, they just don't respond. And that's where we ask for the relationship managers to get involved. We find some customers, they just opt out, or, maybe they're just leaving the bank, or those are the ones that just never engage. And then, the bank has to get involved.
So Steve, if the goal was 3,300 in 3 months, did you get over 75% in 3 months? What was how did that end up, playing out in that time frame?
We probably handled 80%, and then there was the bank ended up handling the remaining 20%.
I want to ask a little bit about your background, but and for those that are listening, if you're a banker and you're in charge of handling these types of conversions, I'm sure this is really right up your alley. And if you're you're a corporate treasury or AP or AR person, maybe you haven't made it this far because you're thinking, what? Why is this on the Treasury Update podcast? I find it interesting when you think about the operations that go behind continuing to expand and grow and develop the tools that a bank offers and making sure that their clients can take advantage of that. And there's a little bit of the, making the relish or making the sausage that has to go into moving people forward onto these new platforms. So thanks for that. Thanks for that story, Steve. Now, maybe you could tell us a little bit about who Superior is and what's your role at Superior.
Superior started in 1932 as a regional check printer out of LA, and we expanded that business to be a one-stop shop with cash vault supplies and endorsement stamps and fulfilling all the banking supplies that commercial clients would require. And then in 2005, when RDC became a product, we started fulfilling check scanners to the industry across the country. And today we deploy 3,000 check scanners a month, to give you some scope there, and in support of the FIs that are signing on new clients every month for RDC. And then, our customers then, asked, hey, could you help us with the Smart Safe program? So we do Smart Safe implementation and provisional credit files through software. And then our clients asked, hey, we're doing these conversion projects. Could you help us with this? So it's a business we got into in 2019. Just like I explained, with the bank requiring 3,000 clients to migrate over 3 months. And so they asked us to do that. And then, when it was very successful, and we decided to offer that up to all of our clients. And it's just grown exponentially since then. We've taken on additional online banking, just different projects.
Complementary areas, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Steve, in that history of 1932 that was like the tail end of the Great Depression. And what's your role at Superior?
And I lead the sales organization for our business.
I want to jump on a couple of best practices from some smaller ones. We have a little more detailed case study. I want to cover that last. That one's more digitally oriented. But if we look at best practices, there's different examples. We don't need to go into a massive amount of it. One of the stories is, it's about adjusting midstream to conflicts. Anytime you're doing something, there's going to be a change. You're probably familiar with the quote, in reality, in theory, reality is just like theory. In reality, theory is nothing like reality. And so adaptation is necessary. Adjusting midstream is necessary. Can you give an example? I think the first one is also about remote deposit capture, a conversion that was going on. Can you just give the thumbnail of what happened?
The first program, happened during COVID. So we were all set to go. The bank was, and then as we all know, in 2020, clients didn't come into the office anymore. So that was a big change. And we had to pivot. The bank had to pivot and make sure hardware was shipped out to those clients that didn't have, because they left their offices and they were going to do their deposits from the remote offices. And some of the pivots we've seen is a bank thinks the back end is set up correctly. We push out the communications and all of a sudden they realize either their vendor didn't flip the switch on some type of setting, and then the bank needs to do that right before the conversion event. And we were able to support that by pushing out the booking tool that would allow the bank 24 hours. So Craig, if you went and you got the link to book your appointment and you booked it, you couldn't book it for 2 days. So that allowed us to send a report back to the bank and say, hey, Craig booked his appointment for Tuesday next week. And this allowed the bank 2 days to get the platform dialed in so that we could go ahead and do the conversion. That was, we'd already pushed out communications and it was kind of, oh, wow, we need some help here with this. And luckily we were able to figure out how to do that, how to dynamically change the scheduling platform. So when you landed on it, it pushed out 2 days before you could book an appointment. So that was a win. It was a nice feature functionality that we were able to help the bank with. And we've seen it being used a couple times now on projects.
Yeah, to gate that allowed them to gate the flow of setup since it was done individually. There was another example where something wasn't working in the process and like in midstream. Can you give us a quick summary of that?
Yeah, it was a learning experience for us as well as the bank. The bank acquired another bank and they were going from one software vendor to another. And we had no idea, the bank didn't have any idea that the clients that were acquired, their scanners wouldn't run on the new application without an ink cartridge. And so we are migrating people over and came to find out that, what a scanner worked fine on this application without an ink cartridge in it, but on the go forward application, it required an ink cartridge. So, we found that out halfway through the process on for those clients that were using that specific piece of hardware, which isn't a very popular, it's not the go-to device for RDC. So it was maybe a 10% of the population, but we had to, luckily being a fulfillment provider of scanners and ink and supplies, we were able to support the bank's effort in getting those ink cartridges out to the clients. And if they needed a new scanner, we could do that. But that was something midstream. And, honestly, the bank looked at us and said, hey, why didn't you know that? I'm like, I didn't know that. And you guys didn't know that. And the software provider didn't say anything. So it was a learning curve. I'm sharing it now with our audience so that those are things to look at and validate with your application service provider is with the various OEMs out there, what do I need to be aware of? It was a learning curve. And if anybody wants to ping me offline, I'll tell you what it was all about.
Yeah, it sounds almost like a pre-pilot. Now, I wanted to move to a bigger case study. This is about a digital conversion. So sometimes banks move from, they add functionality and it just gets incorporated. There's additional functionality. Other times it's a significant shift in digital transformation. Can you share some of the background and scope on this project?
Yeah, I'd love to. It was an East Coast bank, top 100 bank, and we just helped them with their RDC conversion. And they're like, we're going from a homegrown online banking platform to an application. Actually, it was a different application, and that they bought, and they had to migrate 20,000 end users and train them. And they asked if we could assist with that. And it included like ACH and wire training and how to navigate the new platform. And we helped by providing the staff aug and the scheduling application. And what was pretty cool on this unique project is they wanted to share resources, meaning that the bank had allocated a tranche of people internally to this project, and it was a 6-week project. And so they said, hey, we got, these individuals within the bank side, and, Superior, we want X amount of agents on your side for the 6 weeks. And can we both access your scheduling platform to allow, a greater bandwidth of appointment setting? And so we were able to share the application, through the various calendars and allow more time slots for customers to book appointments. And that was a cool feature that, we were able to support and get through that project. And the bank was, really happy about, because it was a cost savings to the bank, right? Instead of hiring me to provide 40 people, they could do it with less external resources and use more internal resources.
Yeah. So the partnering or augmentation, that was pretty interesting. Now, 20,000 clients is a massive number of touches. There's the fourth best practice you list is create client tiers, customize the customer journey based on tier. Was that done here in this type of situation where like some people are like, they use everything, they need high touch, and others are like, the email is fine, right? The 30% that can do it on their own. Did you use some type of segmentation, and how did that work?
Yeah, the banks will, segment into large corporates, middle market, and, small business, SMBs, and so, and the idea is, not all the businesses use all the tools. So the tiering on a typical online banking conversion that we've been a part of is, they tier the clients and they say, okay, large corporates, we definitely want a hand-holding experience of walking them through the changes and training. And then middle market offer that, but first offer self tools, help tools, videos, landing pages, and with a link. If they do need help, they could book an appointment. And then, the small businesses that aren't using all the feature functionality, let's direct them to a website for self-help tools. And then, down the page, more videos, information, and, maybe an 800 number for them to call if they need help, at that point. But so the tiering allows for, just a different journey for the end user, what makes sense for them. And as we know in today's world, most people want a self-service and after hours, when they're done with their day job working, then they get some downtime and then they could, watch videos and go through that process. So tiering is important, and that's, that's a preferred way if you could do that.
Sure. Any key challenges that happen in this that would provide learning or insight?
The communications is key. We touched upon that, and getting all aspects of the bank involved from the relationship managers and getting out in front of the change, letting your clients know that, hey, in 6 months, we're going to be doing this in 3 months, and just reminding them, as we all know, not everybody reads their, these general emails or notifications. And so it's just reinforcing.
I like that.
Yeah. We all do it. So you're like, it's not important today, but, just reinforcing that message and letting them know, through different avenues. And one thing to keep in mind is when you're doing a conversion, you might know the CFO or controller or principals at the end user corporate level, and they might have login and they might be getting the notices, but the actual people doing the functions might not be getting those communications. So you kind of have to look at, hey, who are the users versus the principles, right? And that's something that we talk about. Keep in mind when an FI says, hey, we got 1,000 clients that need to migrate. My first question is that 1,000 users? How many users per client are we talking about? How many workstations? Don't lose sight of that it's, is it a one-to-one relationship? Are they small businesses? So it's, hey, I'm just going to train one person, the admin at the company level, or is one client represent 5 users? And so really your touch point isn't 1,000 touch points, it's 5,000. So everything, you could see how that expands.
Absolutely, Steve. One question too, that since this was a hybrid environment of, it's their staff is being augmented with your team. So there's 2 teams working on this. Were there any adjustments that had to be made midstream? Like they needed more help, or they had more capabilities where they could take on, the bank took on more of the work, or you had to take on more of the work because of, whatever the prevailing situation?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And yeah, what basically on the online banking program I was sharing, we were able to, through questioning on the landing page when booking appointments, segment clients out. So if they wanted training on the ACH platform, they would answer that question, and we could route those appointments back to the bank per se, or if it was, wires, we could route it to a different group. That was pretty cool to have that drop down and segment some of the, the training that way.
Based on complexity, your areas of specialty. That sounds really good. Steve, I want to thank you for your time. For those that are listening, in the show notes, we'll have a link to the 10 best practices for a client change event. And it's good to talk to you on a podcast. The last time we spoke was on a webinar. So good to see you again. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.